There we go. I am glad you are here in class today. I have 3 goals for us today for our class discussion. I want us to talk a little bit about the Enid SPCA video. So you don't have to turn in the worksheet that you completed, but you can pull it out and kind of use it as a guide during our discussion. So my purpose in that worksheet was just that you would be prepared, that you watch the video and kind of have some talking points. And then I do want us to talk about the reading. And so I have some discussion questions for us to talk a little bit about what you read as far as the food radicals on page 56 through 73. And then if we finish early, we finish early. I want to kind of give you all time, since you do have your species report due next week, that if you have questions about that, I can answer them. You can have some work time, or you can just go home early. So again, I'm not going to make us get done early, but if we do, it's fine. Sound good? So, SPCA video. What are some things that stuck out to you, just to kind of start off the conversation? New things you learned, maybe something you didn't know.
I didn't know that they kept a blacklist for people who can't adopt.
Yeah. So how do they create that blacklist?
There's so many things. Literally, it's like, I feel like the whole video, she was talking about more reasons you can't adopt a pet, and I was like, good grief.
It made me think, like, I couldn't adopt a pet.
Really? Why?
Well, I mean, just like in general, they're like,
College student, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
People without a fence, that was kind of, I thought that was pretty sad. Is that a moth? I'm sorry.
oh.
That is.
That's a big old sucker.
Oh, that's a huge moth.
Yeah. I just
That's a bird. That's a bird.
Like, it's kind of sad people that don't have a fence aren't allowed to, I think I had to lie when I adopted my dog, because, yeah, our yard was fenced, but it was fenced for horses around. I mean, my dog couldn't get through that fence.
That happened to us one time. We went to Chicago to go adopt a dog, or try to, and since we lived right off the highway and our fence wasn't completely closed off, they wouldn't let us.
Yeah, it's like, a lot of dogs you can just train to stay on your property. I don't know.
I thought it was interesting. It makes sense though that there's specific types of dogs that they, like certain types are more apt to be adopted. And I thought it was pretty interesting that the black dogs aren't very adoptable.
Or black cats, because I know a lot of people, like, in my area buy black cats for, like, Halloween. And
I was gonna say, aren't they bad luck?
I think
Some
they
of
always do,
them, I don't
because,
know, we have-
I don't know, a lady in town.
They like cross in front of you or something?
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people do. And then like black labs, a lot of them just train them to hunt in our area. So like, I found it very interesting.
Yeah. And then she talked too about older dogs and some of the issues there. Like, why do y'all think that is?
Don't want to have them for a long time.
I think even not just like how long people want to have them, but like when you have a puppy, it's like you're raising it to be your dog. So if you're getting an older dog, it seems like you're just taking on someone else's dog. Like you bond better with a puppy.
Yeah. When it's like, what habits has it picked up?
Yeah.
Did its owner discipline it? Is it trained? Is it? Yeah. And there's also the issue, I feel like a lot of people are concerned too, like with older dogs, like if it was in an abusive home, like how is that going to translate? Because it sometimes makes dogs more aggressive. How's that going to translate? Yeah. You know, mission and goals of the SPCA are pretty straightforward. But what did y'all find interesting about how they raise money and kind of what their budget looks like annually, month to month? I know when she talked about this, it was a lot of it was really surprising to me.
That, well, I wrote down a lot of things, but it was kind of sad that they need $30,000 every month, and in the summer sometimes they don't have even $5,000.
Yeah. Could you imagine how stressful that would be to be on a board that is literally having to fundraise all the time.
Very.
Like, you're just not able to just function
Yeah.
with like some sense of like, well, we know we're always gonna have this amount, and it's
Yeah.
like $200 in the account. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know.
The part that stuck out to me was when she was like, if someone new gets on the board, I'm like gonna resign or whatever. I'm like, so you're just gonna up and leave if someone new gets on the board?
She's been doing it a long time though, a really long time. And there's some other personal things with her that would be the reason for
I think
that.
she said that about if someone wanted to like merge with the ASPCA.
Yeah, that's what it was.
If they what?
If they suggested merging with the ASPCA.
Yeah. So what was her reason for that? Like, why would she be like,
The ASPCA is against animal agriculture. I was curious, so I got on and looked up their website after the video, and that's pretty interesting, just seeing everything that they're against.
yeah. I think that's one reason I just think a lot of Dr. Hickman. Again, if you haven't met her personally or taken a class with her, she's a really funny person. But she's also, like, she is a boss lady, and I like boss ladies. Like, I appreciate that about her too. But she, again, I feel like she doesn't fit that typical stereotype that we would make of a person who probably serves on an SPCA board, right? Her family ranches, like, she lives in Enid still and commutes here every day. She does rangeland research and stuff like that, so she's very animal agriculture. But then she's on a board for a shelter, right? I don't know, that's why I just think she has such a unique perspective and experience to bring to the conversation about how these local shelters work.
I also feel like that's really important with Enid when she said the first Fridays that they have. It's a huge deal. And I know, like, people from Enid who put that event on, and they have a huge ranch, and they've adopted 6 dogs because of it. And, I mean, how she says over 100 dogs are adopted each month, mostly it's because of that. And also, if it was ASPCA, like, Enid wouldn't adopt, because a lot of them are, like, the smaller communities, like Greenwood, and people from Burlington go up there, and all these people, like, from farm and ranch operations go up there because they like it a lot more than ASPCA.
Yeah,
And a lot of people know her, so.
absolutely.
I thought it was impressive too how she's written all of the grants and been granted over around $750,000. That's impressive.
And I think, that's cool, like, writing grants is not an easy thing. Like, it is a skill set that you kind of have to learn. You're gonna have a lot turned away before you get some. And I think it's cool that she's able to use her skill set and what she does here at OSU to give back to her community. And that was one thing I kind of took away too, was that, what I learn in school isn't just for me. There are other ways it can be used. Audrey King, one of the doctoral students in AgCom, she is from a tiny town in Kansas. Why can't I think of the name of it right now? Montezuma, Kansas. And her and her mom are actually, because she's like learned how to write grants in her PhD program, they're applying for a grant to put in a walking trail in her hometown to like help support healthy lifestyles and stuff like that, because they have nothing like that. And I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? To give back to the community. I don't know, but I mean, I think that's something for y'all to think about too. Like, what is it that you learned while you're in school that, it's beneficial to have citizenship, to be involved in kind of these local community boards, volunteer organizations, because you have gotten an education now in something that maybe other people in the community haven't. And so that skill set is what can help better your community. I think that's really important, that we not just use our education for our own personal gain. It can help the community too when we go back. So what were some of the things about SPSA or Enid SPCA that are different than what your initial thoughts were about humane societies? kind of with that, how do local and larger ones differ?
The playtime in the yard,
Uh-huh. What specifically about that?
like how they get to go outside and get a little bit of exercise.
Did you just figure they stayed in kennels the whole time?
Not necessarily, well, kind of, and I'm like, they gotta have some outside activity.
Yeah.
For the local, I found that, you have to pay the shelter if you live outside of town, a fee to adopt. I thought that was
Why do you think they do that?
to make more money. I don't know.
Isn't it because people in town pay city fees and taxes and stuff and it goes towards them?
Yeah, the thought is, they may be receiving a local grant, and so some local taxes are kind of already subsidizing them a little bit. And so, yeah, that's one thing there, especially if they're connected to the local government in any way, providing any type of local service.
One thing I thought was kind of surprising is like how much they rely on like foster families for pets. Cause it seemed like they have so many families that are housing pets for them. But like I feel like at home, like the dog shelter, animal shelter, whatever, like not very many people foster pets through them,
Yeah.
you know? And it seemed like half of their animals are there because their facility is not very big or like big enough to house what they have.
Any of y'all ever thought about fostering a pet?
Out of college.
Crossed my mind.
I think being a college kid is really hard, because like I've just looked at some like just adoption applications, and they're very like thorough and lengthy, like, oh, do you have a little yard, do you rent, or do you have a house? You have to like give them your landlord's number for them to actually call. Like there's a lot of different things you have to like jump through to be able to do it, so.
I've never thought about fostering. I don't know if I'm.
Somebody who did in college. I don't know how she did it.
I think it would take a lot of time, for sure. And then I'd be concerned with having kids, like, again, how's that dog,
Yeah.
or cat, or whatever. Do you think it's a special person that kind of like fills that need in a community? Any other things that you were surprised by, or just kind of things you recognize as differences between local and large humane societies?
The local ones are more likely to be advocates for livestock.
Yeah. Big difference. Why do you think that is? So like ASPCA, why are they so anti-animal agriculture, but yet local shelters don't have problems with it?
I think the national or the larger ones aren't as connected to the people. So the local ones are really involved in their community, they have those relationships. But the larger ones are just like, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, there's something about proximity again, right? Like, you're not gonna have an animal shelter that's anti-animal ag when so-and-so's uncle has their ranch in town or what have you. And two, they probably understand more of the day-to-day of what that means to be involved in animal agriculture. Dr. Hickman talked some more about kind of other things that SPCA does for the community. What are some of those additional services that they provide to Enid and surrounding areas?
They offer cheap spay and neuter services.
Yes.
They also keep a food pantry.
Yeah. Did y'all know that? I thought that was pretty cool.
But then you always have those people that she was saying, like, just take advantage of it, which is
I
ridiculous.
thought it was sad. She said they would drive up in nice cars
Yeah,
and
right.
would take in food.
But then that puts them on the blacklist that they have. They're always coming to get food.
Get that license plate number. Add that to the application. That's a good suggestion.
What I thought was interesting was that they mixed the food that was donated to them. So I didn't think about that, but that does make sense that they would mix it. So it's not just a specific type.
So it's not just all the cheap stuff and the expensive stuff.
Yeah. Old Roy. I know. Gets them every time.
She was like, not that there's anything wrong with it.
I know.
It's not as good.
No, I joke. I'm like, the only way you should feed your dog Old Roy is if it's an outside dog and you're okay with it not pooping in your house. I've never known a dog that it didn't like upset their stomach at some point.
Good old red bag, that's the only type our co-op has.
Really? My uncle's a vet, and he's very, very particular, and you talk to most vets, they're pretty particular about animal diet, and especially dog food. And my uncle swears science diet, and he's like, I know it's more expensive, but you will pick up less poop in your yard, and he's accurate. I tried switching one time in college because I didn't want to pay for it, and then I was like, go to the bathroom like 6 times a day instead of 2, and it makes it different how their bodies digest, and there's something to a little bit more quality dog food. So, you know, kind of looking again at the SPCA and what all she talked about with what they do, how they support the community, but how their budget works, what do you feel like communities can better do to support SPCA? And maybe even back in your community, what can you do to better support these local shelters?
Volunteer time,
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, what did you talk about with volunteers?
And she said like kids went and read to the dogs. I thought that was the cutest thing.
Yeah, I'm like, that's doable.
And like kids and old people is what she was saying.
I thought it was pretty interesting how she was mentioning that white women are the ones who are more apt to volunteer.
Why do you think that is?
Wasn't it donate? She said 80% of white women over the age of 40 are the people who donate to organizations like that.
And they volunteer, I think she said both.
Yeah.
Was it volunteer too?
I mean,
They
this
just
is
have-
a pretty broad generalization, but in most communities, who has more time to volunteer? White women?
Yep.
Why?
Not working, staying at home.
Sometimes that luxury is not available to all
Yeah.
demographics and SESS, you know, like, so it is interesting to think about that and maybe why that occurs.
It is funny when you mention that, because out of all the volunteer situations and like other zoo, like animal workplaces I've been in, every single like woman I've worked with is literally white with brown hair, just like every single one of them.
Call me out.
They all look like me, and I'm like, my people.
Chad says the reason why I could never be a stay-at-home mom is because I wouldn't stay at home. I would just volunteer and find something else to do. And he's 100% right. And he's like, at least you do stuff now that you get paid for. So, anything else y'all learned from Dr. Hickman? That just kind of, again, as we have these animal welfare rights conversations, sometimes humane societies and shelters get thrown under the bus. And I don't know, anything you learned that maybe changed your perspective a little bit?
I feel like part with the local versus larger animal shelters, like how you were talking about like proximity, like the smaller ones want to make sure that like the pet is going to a good home, where the larger ones are like, yeah, adopt them, that's fine. Take them off of our hands, you know? Because it's like, they're not necessarily actually after ensuring a good home, they just don't want them out on the streets where they're at. kind of thing.
Right. It's like they want quality care.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting was that they could decide what dogs they wanted to take in.
Oh, yeah.
From the animal control.
I was really surprised about that one that she said she had for 5 years. I don't know how they got, like, how did they do that?
Could you
Yeah.
imagine?
I would just be begging somebody to take it up.
Like, I feel like we will give it to you for free.
Yeah.
Honestly, I might have taken it. 5 years is a long time.
Nobody's mentioned anything about their euthanization policy and how that works.
Well, I did, like, she mentioned like in 2010, there was an 85% kill rate, and now it's 85% live release.
Crazy, isn't that? And why was there that shift? Do y'all remember? Like what they did to try to reverse that?
Was it the spay and neuter?
Spay and neutering. Again, they kind of got out and involved in the community more, which made their adoption rates go up. Could you imagine 85% of the animals that came in were being euthanized?
I also thought it was interesting that there's like whole, like counties or whatever jurisdictions that have spay and neuter, like, laws.
I think that's.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Excellent idea.
Oh, there's another thing I just remembered. I thought it was interesting. I didn't know that vet students can't work on owned animals in surgeries.
Oh, I have a good story for that. Here's one reason why a lot of places have moved away from that. So in Auburn, we have Auburn University. 30 minutes down the road is Tuskegee University. Both schools have a vet school. And Tuskegee doesn't charge as much for their services as Auburn does. And of course, like for some things, like depending on where you're at in vet school, you may get to participate in different stuff. There was somebody that found a dog that had, I don't remember exactly what the injury was, but they didn't want to go to Auburn's vet school because they didn't want to pay what the cost was going to be, so they drove to Tuskegee. And they put a first-year vet student on it, and they ended up, whatever they put on this animal to help it, burned its skin. The person ended up having to bring it back to Auburn's vet school, and they were having to do like skin grafts and stuff on the dog. And so that's kind of like, was around the same time that vet schools were starting to make more policy, and then even local shelters were starting to say like, hey, we're grateful that you'd be willing to provide this for us, but we need to also make sure that like the level of training matches up with what needs to happen with the animal. So I remember seeing pictures of that dog.
I would probably take my dog to a vet school, like you said, if it was a more affordable thing, as long as they had supervision. So I guess they didn't have good supervision in that time.
Yeah, it was a mess.
Well, one time I had to utilize our vet school here to bring my dog, because it was early in the morning, and he was like throwing up blood out of nowhere. My dog is an eater of all things, like he will eat anything and everything he can get his mouth on. And he hadn't eaten anything, and he was actually just fine, but none of the vets in town were willing to take him on an emergency visit, because it was so early and they were all in surgery. So I had to bring him over here, but they had, a senior vet cousin, and then they had vet students around him checking, so. But I mean, it was very great service, and I could charge it to Bursar, and like, it was very affordable. It was fantastic. That scared me for no reason. They're like, he's perfectly healthy. I'm like, healthy dogs don't throw up blood.
Well, and y'all were talking about like countywide, like spay and neuter things. Again, when I was working at Auburn, one of the like services that the vet school provided to the Auburn community was if you found a feral cat, they would spay it or neuter it for free. Like it was like a program, like they had applied for a grant to pay for all the medical supplies, and like the goal was to catch every feral cat and spay and neuter it. And I thought that was pretty cool. And you saw a huge decline in the feral cat population in town. They used to be everywhere, they jump out of bushes at you. They were
Sounds like
ratchet.
Alva.
Huh?
Sounds like Alva.
I mean, like, they were little ratchet things. They just.
We have a policy that if there's feral cats, you can shoot.
Really?
Which is amazing. Yeah, the boys in my class, like, we would go, my mom, she's a city clerk, so she helped with the mandate. She's like, so get your silencers and have a fun night tonight. Because we had over, I'd say about 500 cats in our town.
Oh my gosh, no wonder y'all have a cat lady.
More cats than people.
More cats than people. It was so bad.
I swear I live in Burlington now, like.
Well, we don't have many cats now. We got rid of the tigers that they were staying
Just
in.
all your stories.
Most of our English
It's a
teachers
fun
last
time.
time,
Yeah.
or history, except for your teacher's house. There's cats.
Most of them. Most of the feral cats, like, populated there, came to Burlington, and my mom had a very nice talking to, and then I didn't get a great grade in the class. That was a really bad time in my life.
Like, and I kind of hope the video just, it would have been nice to have Dr. Hickman in class, because y'all would have been able to ask, her your own questions. And she's definitely the type that responds to emails. So if there's things that you think of and you're like, I just really want to know the answer to this, like, feel free to shoot her an email. She'll respond and tell her you watched, her presentation in class. And again, I hope it just gives us a different perspective that, like, not all things, animal humane related are bad, right? Again, we kind of tend to, if we hear anything that's like, da-da-da, humane, whatever, we're like, and we're not. You know, a lot of them are providing a lot of good services to our communities. And so supporting them doesn't make us hippies, right? So.
Another interesting thing that I thought was that they would take their dogs and cats to Denver because they did not have any shelters there.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
I thought it was crazy all the liability issues they can have. I did not realize like they could be sued for just about anything. And all they're trying to do is provide a service for people to adopt animals, but like if these animals do anything to these people, then they can be sued, which is, I thought that was stupid.
We are a very litigious society nowadays. We like to sue over everything. You hurt my feelings, I'm gonna sue you, right? And it is sad. It is sad that kind of services like this have to deal with that.
Because she said like they euthanized all the animals that would bite any worker whatsoever. And like that animal could just freak accident bite one person one time and that's it, just because like they overstepped a boundary or something and they just have to kill it. It's just like, it's kind of wrong, I thought. So
But if they didn't, what might that worker turn around and do?
right?
Yeah.
It's just sad that we would kill a dog over the chance of something like that. I mean, it's just,
When some of that behavior is just their natural reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
like, what if they just accidentally stepped on the dog's tail? Like, some dogs bite when you step on the tail. It's not the dog's fault, it's just natural.
Yeah. Well, if you look at their website, SPCA, be careful. They do, and she mentioned this in the video, they tend to get a lot of puppies. And they have some of the cutest ones all the time.
I like how she said, like, if they could find, like, a litter of Labrador, or they'll get them as soon as they can and flip them.
Yeah.
like they're flipping a house or something.
It's
Maybe they're taking all
crazy.
these puppies.
But I mean, they
Make
get
a
some
quick profit.
good animals. I mean, I don't even look at the local one here. I know that sounds bad, but like anytime we've gone through the idea of getting another dog, I'm like, you need SPCA. They get all the good stuff. They do. They've got some of the cutest dogs.
Golden Retriever puppies, because they pick them.
They had one on there. Her name was Moana for a while, but I was just like, Chad, look at her. Look at her. We need her. We need her. Didn't happen. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about food radicals. So this is the first time in a couple weeks that we've come back to this book. And definitely relevant as we talk about animal agriculture and some very different views on it, right? Page 56 through 73 really highlighted two and then kind of pulled in a third food radical of ours. And so starting on 56 with Cody Carlson, here's my first question, if you can remember it from your reading. What are 3 things about our supply of meat, dairy, and eggs that Cody Carlson revealed by undercover footage of Animal Act? And these may not be like specific cases, but if you could think back, again, it's kind of on page 57 towards the end, and 58 talks about like lessons we can learn. So rather than just looking at these undercover people as bad, what are some things we have learned about maybe our meat food supply?
Sometimes it's just a few people that are doing bad things.
Yeah. Most of the problems are because of a few people. And so I think, while that is a really good thing to point out, again, we're always going to have bad actors. It also needs to stop us from saying it doesn't happen at all, right? The footage is there, right? You have the recorded audio tapes. You have the recorded videotapes. If you just deny it, you're outright lying at that point, right? So yeah, what's another thing that we learned?
That people have a mental separation between farm animals and pets.
Yeah.
it's this cognitive dissonance. If they don't have experience with it, some of the things that just they get outraged by are what we would consider standard practices. And hopefully y'all are kind of making that connection with some of the things we read in Compassion by the Pound. You know, that how do we determine what standard practice is, right? Can there be bias there and how that's determined? Sure. But if we have sound evidence from multiple parties that, you know, this is probably what we're doing that's providing the highest degree of welfare, sometimes people just are going to have that dissonance of like what typically goes on a farm. What else?
So there really isn't enough workers to give the care to all these animals as they're actually planning.
Yeah. So again, even Compassion by the Pound kind of talked about that. It said, you know, sometimes larger operations have better welfare because they can afford it. But at the same time too, some of these smaller farms that are committed to it because they have like that lower ratio of worker to animal, animals get pretty good kind of one-on-one care. And so it does, I mean, when you start outnumbering, making that ratio so much higher, you're going to limit what one person can do to ensure the welfare of 1,000 chickens, sometimes 50,000 chickens, right? And that was interesting. On page 61, really down at the bottom, so I'll kind of read a couple sentences. It says, after careful consideration, Cody agreed to leave his old life behind and become a farm worker with a hidden camera and secret agenda. We mentioned earlier that Cody is a tough guy. We say that because he was able to spend most of his time in a workplace that violated his sense of morality. How would you feel, react, behave in a place that violated your personal moral code?
It would be really, really hard to continue doing so.
So what for you, like, what would be a working situation that you feel like would completely break your moral code, that would be really hard for you to work in?
Mine would be an abortion clinic.
Okay.
That would break me, probably.
Yeah. What else?
Retail, therapy,
Rachel, why?
because you never know what kind of customers you're gonna get.
I think working for ICE would be difficult for me
Why so?
because people are just trying to have a better life, and sending them back to something they're trying that hard to get away from would just be, I wouldn't want to be able to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if y'all saw, but there's a new whistleblower from ICE, particularly around women's issues, and she was in a situation where she was a healthcare provider, and she broke the code and, you know, told about what they were doing to a lot of women down in Georgia. But, you know, she felt like she was in a very morally compromised situation because these women, well, they were, you know, being harmed, and they had no idea what was going on.
And she's a healthcare provider first, and so, you know, they have, I can't think of the, like, moral code, but they have, like, it starts with an H. Hippopathic oath that doctors or anyone in the healthcare profession takes, that, like, ultimately, like, regardless of what government, society you live in, whatever, like, these are things you're supposed to put first. You're supposed to prioritize people and their health and the care, like, regardless of money and da-da-da-da, like, you sign that oath. And, yeah, to then work in a situation that you think you're providing healthcare services, and then you're being asked to do things that completely go against this oath that you've signed. Whoa, that'd be so hard.
Yeah.
And then if you speak out, you're probably gonna get fired and reprimanded, and
Like, could you imagine being one of the supervisors for, like, all the kids that have in cages? No way.
Yeah.
There's no way I could do that.
what other work environment do you feel like would be hard for you to work in? Does it kind of go against your moral code?
I mean, I've been in a work environment that, like, it's not necessarily due to the managers, but like where people don't believe in God, and that was hard for me just because like I couldn't even talk about the things I believed in without getting like shut down. But it, you know, like I'm not doing that, like doing the same to them. You know what I mean?
One of my first struggles with my first job, it's interesting, it was at a faith-based institution, but I was learning money was being mishandled unethically. And it was so hard for me to feel like I was representing a faith-based institution knowing that these things were happening behind the scenes. Like, it ate at me. And I was like also still trying to raise money for things, knowing that like, there was one person who donated $200,000. And then I found out a month later that because they were short in another area budget, they switched that money over there and I needed to raise it. And I was like, that person didn't give money for that.
Wow.
Like, I mean, I struggled with it. So it may not be just like the whole purpose of what an organization does, but those kind of like daily actions that go against your ethics, your morals. So when you think about that, when you think about those situations that you're like, oh, it'd be so hard for me to be in, even if you don't agree with Cody Carlson's moral code, what do you think it was like for him to work in that environment? And do you think it's fair for the authors to call him tough? Or
I would have had a really hard time like not saying something when I didn't feel like something was right, or just like not blowing my cover or something, or
Going back to the,
releasing the footage earlier or something, because I'd have a really hard time keeping that secret just to myself for such a long time.
well, going back to that time where like he saw the chicken's prolapse and like he asked that other worker, he was like, do we not have veterinary care for this? And like, are you an undercover cop? I was like, yeah.
yes, no.
Learn very quickly not to ask questions.
I think it would be tough, but also we have to see it from the standpoint of he chose to go into that situation. So I feel like he should have like probably prepared himself that obviously he's probably gonna see stuff that wasn't like morally right or whatever. So that's how I see it as like.
You know, again, I feel like, and maybe this has just been my perspective and kind of the area of agriculture I've grown up in, but there's I mean, like, people that are undercover reporters in animal ag have always had like the wanted sign on their forehead, right? Like, there's nothing about anything that say that we're gonna listen to what they say, we're going to not even like consider that they might be a good human being, kind of thing. Like, they have just been completely dismissed and seen as radical, right? But in kind of reading about Cody, is there anything that shifted your viewpoint on that, that like, you know, yes, there's a little bit of an agenda, but like, is it as sinister as we make it up to be? What do y'all think?
I mean, I think when we think about people going undercover, it's like we think they're trying to destroy the whole industry, but really they're just trying to stop poor practices from happening. And like, yeah, it's hard to see that because like you said, like clearly they do have an agenda, but they're not out to get the entire industry. They just want it to be done right.
Mm-hmm. What would happen if people like Cody Carlson didn't exist?
Malpractice would continue.
Would there
This,
be?
this kind of information would probably never reach the public.
Yeah, no one would know what was happening.
So is there some good that does come out of it?
Yeah.
There is. And again, that's where I think we can kind of come back to saying like the truth is in the middle, right? And we don't have to be on one side or the other. We don't have to be anti-undercover people, right?
Yeah.
We can say, hey, thank you for showing us these bad actors. We don't want them either, right? Like, because it makes everybody else look bad. Anything you don't agree with Cody Carlson?
I didn't like how he said on page 61, I've eaten a vegan diet for over 15 years now. I enjoy it. I feel good. Blah, 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 blah. It's a good way to withdraw my support from animal cruelty. That's fine. Then he said veganism means a better food system for farmers, a healthier diet for consumers, and a better world for animals. I was like, healthier diet? I don't know. Like, you're not a food nutritionist.
It's debatable.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting was I felt like a lot of what he was trying to say was more animal rights rather than welfare.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the things he was doing was definitely promoting more, animal welfare by identifying these, but it definitely comes from that animal rights perspective, for sure.
The thing that I kept coming back to is he kept saying how the animals need to be treated as pets, essentially. Like, you're not gonna put your dog into a cage and never, socialize with it.
Yeah, but we're also not gonna eat the dog.
Yes.
So that's a perfect segue into my next question. So page 62, the middle of the second paragraph, it says, most of us would never treat our pets like farm animals are treated. Yet farm animals are equally sentient. So that means they have equal sentiments, demeanors, feelings. Why do we condone the current poor treatment of farm animals? For those who agree that pets and farm animals are equally sentient, the logic's hard to refute but easy to ignore. All you have to do is not think about it. Cody comes into play here. His captured footage makes you think about it. What do you think? Why do we?
I mean, I feel like if it was socially normal to eat dogs, then even if we had dogs as pets, we would still not think anything of eating other dogs. You know what I mean? Like we used to breed sheep, and like the thought of the ewes that we have going to slaughter, I mean, like obviously they're not gonna be good at that point, but like the breeding animals, at least in a small scale operation, become like pets. Like the thought of them going off to be slaughtered is like heartbreaking, but it's like, well, we know the babies are gonna do that eventually, you know? I think it's just like the specific animals, I guess. And like people have cows as pets. I don't know why, but they do, you know? And it's like, I mean, at least for me personally, like I feel like I can just decipher between the two, like knowing whether it's a pet or knowing if it's being used for production purposes.
I think a lot of it is just your mindset going into
Yeah.
having the animal.
Yeah.
I have my horse, and I'm not planning on doing anything with him. He's just kind of a yard ornament right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But
we used to have a dairy, and it was my very first show heifer, and I still have her. She's 14 years old. Like, she's still kicking out in the pasture, enjoying her life, and that's like, when you go to Stillwater, I'm gonna take her to the barn, so that way you ain't gonna be crying. I said, no, she was born here, she's gonna die here. Who won that battle? I told her, like, she's still there.
So my question is the debate then, is it whether we should eat animal-based food? Like, what do you think the biggest debate is with a lot of kind of these undercover reporters going in? Is it that whether we should eat animal-based food, or is the debate about how we treat the animals we eat?
I feel like ultimately it's just how they're treated. Because like a lot of argument goes to not eating them, but like realistically when you think about it, like people don't want to eat them because of how they're treated, not because it's an animal. Like it's because of the treatment they're going through when they're alive.
But on the flip side, people have their pets and they've not been around the production side. And so they just assume that all of these animals are pets, but they're not. So I think I could see both sides of it.
And I feel like there's two very different groups of like vegans and everything. They're just like strictly like animals, like don't do that. And others are like, practices could be better for my diet. I just don't really want to, but whoever else like eats animals, that's fine. And then there's just very radical vegans. And I think that's also why it's like, I feel like he wasn't one. He just wanted to see what was happening through everything. And other people aren't that way and aren't willing to listen.
It's just interesting. I don't know. I felt like after I read his story, I had a little bit more understanding of where some of these undercover reporters are coming from. And again, not villainizing them so much. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which on page 63, kind of that first paragraph, talks about gag laws.
I didn't realize that was a thing.
Yeah. What did y'all think about that? Do
I
you
thought
think
it
that's
was-
stifling free press?
I thought it was crazy how he kind of got everything done right before those started happening.
I feel like those laws in themselves make it so that ag producers are actually trying to hide something. Because if they were open, they just need to be open with it and like show everyone that we're doing good, like, and then there wouldn't be so much hate for them.
Gosh, I remember being in high school, and it was really when, I mean, a lot of this stuff started coming out on the internet, and things were, you know, information is more accessible. And I remember when these states, like, and especially like even Florida Farm Bureau got in on like, no one's allowed to bring a camera on farms, like this isn't allowed, no reporters, and I'm like, I don't think this is gonna work. How do you think that's backfired for agriculture? Or do you think it's backfired?
I think it makes people just more skeptical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question already, like, why can't you?
I mean, I feel like it's kind of like that day we were talking about how some of the websites didn't show budgets. It's like, you're not being transparent, so how am I supposed to trust you?
Yep.
You know? Like, if I can't take a camera, then clearly there's something you don't want me to capture and share, so.
It's like admitting guilt without actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you think, playing devil's advocate, why do you think animal agriculture is reluctant to be completely transparent with all of our practices and how we do things?
And I also think that in a picture, things can look worse than they are. You know what I mean? Or like, people might see like, oh, there's an injured animal. Like, obviously it's something with the practice, but like, animals get injured, you know?
What were you gonna say, Stephanie?
I was gonna say, best case scenario, people are just worried about, non-ag people not understanding the context of what's going on. Like, for example, when pigs have their babies and they're in their farrowing, that's what it's called, right? Farrowing
Yeah,
phase?
farrowing.
They, are just doing that to protect the babies, and like, people might not understand that, so I think best case scenario, they're just worried about people not understanding context. But worst case scenario, there are janky things going on.
I don't know why you just saying farrowing made me think of this. Y'all can use this as a joke one day. So, you know, gestation crates, that's when they're pregnant. You have gestation periods of animals. You really want to freak somebody out. Talk about a human pregnancy. Instead of saying I'm 18 weeks pregnant, tell someone you're 18 weeks in the gestation cycle. It'll really freak them out.
Try that.
You know, and you know work good for you, right? I do things like that sometimes, and I just love people's reaction.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got 18 weeks in the gestation cycle. I don't know, sorry, farrowing crates made me think of gestation crates, and just like my brain today. So,
More gestation.
That was so sarcastic. She's so giggled. She's giggled. She's got the giggles. Look at her.
I shouldn't be allowed to do stuff like this. Okay. So, kind of this idea of like, all right, kind of our reaction to these animal activists has been ag laws. We haven't been transparent. We now read about somebody who's trying to kind of counter that to fix the problem and is approaching it in a different way, Mr. Trent Luce. Had any of y'all heard about him before reading that? What did you think about Trent?
I'd like to meet him.
I was saying that same thing. This guy would be someone really interesting to sit down and talk to him.
Any of y'all like gone to listen to his podcast or like radio stuff? Y'all should. Be pretty cool. So what's your opinion of his approach to discussing animal welfare in livestock industry?
What I thought was really cool is that he just wears his ranching get up everywhere, just so that way he'll start a conversation with someone.
Yeah. You should Google and look at like Trent Luce picture. Like you can find Google images of him, and like you will, you'll find these random pictures of him in the airport where someone's taking a picture with him because they saw him at whatever thing he was at.
you know?
I honestly think like his approach as a whole is like super smart way to do so.
Why do you think that?
Because like he's getting out there and like he's taking all these flack from like these conferences, like people booing him, but he's still standing proud, ready to tell people like the truth and like everything good and what it is really to educate people, not backing down.
Do you feel like he's educating or defending? And what's the difference?
I think he's educating because he listens.
Expand on that.
Well, there's a couple of things where he was going to, what's his name's? Was it? I don't remember. That one guy that like called him out and called him his shadow or something.
The Kennedy guy or whatever.
Yeah.
And he went like into the bathroom and told him like that he had to be responsible for his lies or something. And I just thought that was really funny. But good because he was like, he's like ready to actually have a conversation with somebody, I think, and not just, it says, a key component of trans advocacy is that he carefully listens to agriculture's critics. And he goes to animal rights conferences. And then there was another thing, he impersonated an animal rights activist in a debate. I thought that was really funny. Like, he's just very educated about the other side too, I think.
Yeah. So I love, like, anytime in class we do debates and people get stuck on a side they don't agree with, but isn't that the best practice for us to actually learn about that side? And it actually helps you build your arguments stronger when you can understand where the other side is coming from. Yeah, I liked where he said kind of below that on 67, he said, I've tried to live in the trenches. I wanted to understand why people think the way they think. And I think far too often, those of us that have been, like myself, in an industry for 6 generations, we never stop and ask ourselves why we do what we do. We just accept those things as progress without actually stopping and asking ourselves why we do that. It's simple. We do it to produce more with less. But realizing, like, periodically it's good for us to stop and just listen. And so it's interesting because they call kind of this part Trent Luce defends the livestock industry, and after reading I was like, he's not defending, he's educating. I don't even want to say the word advocating. Because what's the difference between advocating and educating?
I don't know.
Is advocating like more like just getting people to think about the ideas, and educating is like going into more depth?
Do we listen when we advocate? No. We're kind of getting people to try to buy in. I tend to, me personally, feel like advocating is more on the marketing side of things. And so when we start going down that route of advocating for things, we're more willing to hide truths, more willing to figure out how to make them prettier, right? Because we're trying to market, getting people to buy into something. Defending, we're not listening at all, right? And we're just arguing. That doesn't solve anything. But what does educating do? It involves listening, bringing people to the table, having conversations, which is probably going to help people change their mind more. Educating. So don't hate me when people say advocate, that I cringe a little on the inside. And I used to use that word. I think in my first job application, I said I was passionate about ag and wanted to advocate for things. Like, I've been there. Like, this has been kind of an opinion that I've had to develop over time myself, as I have just seen kind of what I feel like are some good things and not so good things, and how we approach that perspective of trying to reach people that aren't in ag, personally. Again, kind of going with Trent Luce, what do you think we would learn, or what if we learned to listen to our critics as Trent has? How might that be beneficial to people in ag?
It might help them loosen up and get more comfortable with revealing what they do and like talking to people about what they do. Just because where I come from, it's very I'm not very connected with ag. Like when I grew up right next to Washington DC. I had no idea what FFA or 4-H was, but I knew who PETA was. I knew who the Humane Society was. I knew all this bad stuff. But it's also just like getting farmers comfortable enough to come to the public and be like, hey, this is me. This is what I do. This is my product, without being so fearful of everything. They kind of took those steps to educate people around them, and that kind of just naturally spreads to also other people around them too. Kind of help with that.
I mean, like you said, like, there's so many people in the industry that aren't educating. They're just advocating, or they're just defending, and like, that's just gonna make people defensive on, like, the opposite side is just gonna be defensive on their own end, or, take offense to what you have to say because you're not taking them into consideration. You're just shoving your information down their throat.
And I think about y'all's training now that you've had in ag leadership, and how specifically kind of the leadership concepts and principles y'all learned about, like how can it help you in your future careers if it's directly involved with ag or not? How can it help you guide people in their approach to doing things like this, right? Because not everybody's taken a class in leadership theory.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I think about is LMX, relationships. Relationships are so important, and I think we learn the value of that through what we do. And we're not going to change people's minds if we don't have relationships with them. We're not going to be able to have that conversation, that dialogue, to educate if there's not an established relationship there ahead of time. And again, I think that's not something that comes naturally to us when we think about promoting, because so far, our take on how to promote is to market. So we end up in that advocating or defending instead of educating. And I feel like that's something that y'all can uniquely bring to the table with employers, is like, hey, it may be good to do this like huge social media campaign where we're just like pumping everybody with information and like debunking all these facts. But if none of the people that follow their social media page feel connected to what is happening, nobody's gonna like it, nobody's gonna pay attention to it, they're gonna just unlike it and go do something, right? Like, or the people who like the page, it's that like tyranny of an echo chamber. It's all gonna be the people who already support that specific thing anyways. So you may get a bunch of likes, but these aren't people whose minds you're trying to change, right? I think that's something cool that y'all will be able to bring to organizations. Again, that component of relationship, and how can we do a better job of that so that we can educate. Any other thoughts about the reading? I know it mentioned Tabor Ward a little bit. She has a little different approach to animal welfare. Anybody think she's kind of there right towards the end? She's the one that has the farm in Colorado.
Oh, yeah, the goats.
Yeah. Mountain Flower Goat Dairy.
I thought it was fine.
So if I remember back when we did the activity of like, who do you think you're going to agree with the most, not agree with the most? She was one of the ones that people said, I just don't know that I'm going to like her approach. Like, she's just a city girl trying to have this like farm. Anything change about your perspective of her after reading a little bit more about her story and why, she started this farm because she saw some of those undercover videos that people like Cody Carlson did. But do you think her approach is working? Do you think it's anything you don't like about it?
I think there's definitely a specific type of market for her, and her being like in the city, having the last piece of property there, she's able to market to that specific group of people.
And she wants to educate, right? Like, that's one of her goals. Like, that's why she promotes people coming out to her farm. So think, again, going back to this idea of whether we defend, advocate, or educate. I would say, at first my gut reaction is, well, what is she educating about? Like, I'm always going to have that question, right? With any type of like agritourism operation. And sometimes I do get skeptical of like, well, do they really have the background to be educating? But what she's doing establishes relationships with people. And so people are listening to her.
I was gonna say, it's like those people are so far disconnected anyway that like, yeah, of course we want them to have a deeper education of it, but like they're getting something. And we should appreciate that she's bringing that to her city, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It really doesn't bother me. I mean, if she can make that work for her business, then more power to her. Like, she's not doing anything wrong that I can think of.
But I mean, it's just interesting. People are gonna be more willing to listen to someone like her and what she has to say on what's considered good animal welfare practices, all that, because they go to the farm, they talk to her. They have a petting zoo and see the goats, and, you know what I mean? Again, it's that relationship. And that, no, it may not be ideal for every farm to have an agritourism operation that brings people in there. But couldn't we utilize individuals in this way to help bridge that gap? And instead of, again, seeing them as this completely separate part of the ag sector, and sometimes thinking they're opposed to what we're doing, we could say, hey, thanks for being a bridge builder. Now let's us work together a little bit more. Like, let's be more inclusive, right? I don't know, that's something that I really thought about after reading her story is, we don't need to dismiss, just because someone didn't grow up in 5 generations of a farm, and maybe this is their first take of it, and it's a little tiny thing that they're mainly making their money off of people coming and picking berries and milking goats, doesn't mean there's not some usefulness in helping educate the public about what we're doing. So, we need those people, just like in everything else. Diversity's a good thing. Still liking this book? Can tell I liked it. Well, that's all I got for today. We almost went the whole time. As we think about next week, any questions?
I wasn't doing kind of like assigned report. Do we,
Yes.
we do a presentation though. Do we need to talk about it?
Yes, however you want to present, and you can have video, what have you. Just really the stipulation is that you are talking about the animal welfare issues with your species, 5 to 10 minutes.
Is dress like casual?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess the other big thing with it to just remember, I am not telling y'all ahead of time what day you're presenting on. I haven't even decided yet. But you do need to have them uploaded before class in Canvas on Tuesday. Because what I would like for me and Susie to be able to do is to get here a little bit early Tuesday. Go ahead and download the presentations of those who will be presenting so that we can kind of get through them quickly. So if y'all could try to have them up by 2 o'clock, an hour before class, that would be really helpful. I think that's it.
You want the
Is there like a...
worksheets from the SPCA?
Nope, you're good. It was just to help prepare you for class today. You don't have to... Sorry. Yep, you're good. Just the presentation. So look at it. I know that I have chickens. I still haven't heard back from him yet. But those 3 weeks, I'm not sure what day you're gonna do this. So what we'll do is you're here Tuesday. I'll let you know as soon as I hear from him. Not a problem.
I started watching some videos and stuff yesterday, and I was